Okay, so our next speaker will be Samantha Cassera, PhD student at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern, and she'll be presenting on is in-kind kinder than cash, the impact of money versus food aid on social emotions and aid take-up. Slides.
No, I have to click on slides again. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to present this work at this conference. I'm so excited to share it with all of you awesome scholars and hear your feedback. So first, I'm going to share with you a thought experiment that we shared with our US participants. Imagine that due to the economic crisis brought on by COVID-19 and the dramatic rise in prices of basic life necessities such as groceries and gas, you've not been able to buy fresh groceries and you've been living off of mostly cheap fast food for months. If this situation continues, you'll have to face skipping meals or going hungry. So now I know this group isn't going to be surprised by this statistic, but this is a plight that nearly 25% of people across the world struggle with, food insecurity. It's 1.9 billion individuals. And even in the US, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, 1 in 10 households were considered food insecure in 2020. So in this research, I asked the question, if you were one of these individuals, how would you feel and respond if a charity offered you in-kind food aid to help meet your food insecurity? How would you feel instead if a charity offered you cash for you to go buy groceries with? Now, I'm not taking a poll. No one has to raise their hands and vote. I just want you to keep this question in mind as I continue on with the talk, because this is what I'm asking in this project, how food insecure individuals feel and respond when being offered one of these 2 different aid types controlling for the objective value. So some of you might have intuitions that offering money is going to be superior than offering food. It can offer individuals a greater sense of autonomy. It is more flexible, it's more fungible. Even within this particular need state of food insecurity, people can better meet their own preferences, buy specific groceries that they like, as compared to having that selected for them. It's also the most studied poverty intervention in low and middle income countries. These are just a handful of statistics from a very large literature. Cash transfers have been shown to have so many positive consequences and has even been compared to food and found that both are comparable when used in meeting food insecurity. There's also a widespread philanthropic endorsement in giving cash to individuals struggling with poverty and food insecurity. There's this movement, the effective altruism movement, that prioritizes rationality and impact above all else when being altruistic. And they use giving cash as their benchmark that they use when fundraising other potential charity ventures and say, okay, well, how much better is this than cash transfers? They measure everything against this gold standard. Nevertheless, I predict in this project that recipients of aid are going to feel better and be more likely to accept in-kind food aid. Now, this might be shocking to some of you, so I'm gonna go through my theory behind why I think this is gonna be the case. So for this project, I pull from Alan Fiske's theory of social relationships, or the relational models theory, which posits that there are 4 cross-cultural elementary forms of social relationships, 2 of which are market pricing and communal sharing. So Fiske has written that these elementary models are elementary models that people use unselfconsciously to construct, understand, respond to, evaluate, and coordinate social relationships. So these are the structures that help operate what kind of social expectations are on a particular individual in any given context. Now, market pricing relationships are based off of the norm of proportionality. So you can think of going to the grocery store. When you get a bag of apples, you're expected to give resources in proportion to that bag of apples. Whereas communal sharing relationships are more so based off of love and connectivity, where you expect that giving and receiving is given freely because individuals need help and you care about them. You belong to some sort of collective group. Now, what kind of social relationship do people think that they're in with charities? My extension of this theory is that I expect that the aid object itself communicates a lot to the recipients about these social relationships. It can tell them if they're more so in a market pricing relationship or a communal sharing relationship. Where I expect that when offered cash, individuals will feel like they're in comparatively more of a market pricing relationship because it's both the common currency of and symbol of market pricing relationships. And also, I expect that when offered in-kind food aid in comparison, people will feel like they're in comparatively more of a communal sharing relationship. There's some literature from anthropology suggesting that giving and sharing of food does in fact trigger feelings of being a part of a collective community. Now, I expect that when individuals are in more of a market pricing relationship with charities, they're going to feel heightened stigma because they're not able to give anything in proportion back to that charity. So they're going to feel more like an undesirable social partner and might feel more ashamed to receive aid when receiving this object. Whereas I expect when individuals are receiving food from a charity, they're going to feel heightened feelings of belongingness and more positive social emotions of feeling respected and cared for, because again, it's based off of this norm of giving and receiving help based off of feelings of care. Now, I ran a pilot study I'm just going to go over really quickly, testing this initial theory and assumption, where I described the different social relationships using prior literature, and then asked people how much they would be in each of the different relationships with a charity that offered them money or groceries, and find support for the underlying theory extension, where I find that people are comparatively more likely to feel like they're in a market pricing relationship when offered money as compared to food. So my first hypothesis is this main effect, and my second hypothesis is this dual mechanism pathway, where individuals are going to feel comparatively less negative social emotions like shame when offered food, and comparatively more positive social emotions like being cared for when offered food. And then together, these are going to predict the effect of take-up. So to test these two hypotheses, I ran a series of 5 main experiments and 3 supplemental experiments across the US and Kenya, across 2 different need contexts on over 5,000 participants. All of these studies were pre-registered, all of the data, materials, and syntax is on OSF, and I stuck up a link in case anyone wants to poke around the data. For the sake of time, I think I have just like 3 or so minutes left. I'm going to just highlight the key results from the field experiment that I ran in Kenya with food insecure individuals in collaboration with the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics. So this was the community that we surveyed, Kibera, which is outside of the main city, Nairobi. I stuck up some statistics about our sample. In order to qualify, they had to be considered moderately to severely food insecure. And they also had to let us know that they were available during our aid pickup weekend. So that was going to be Friday and Saturday all day. Also, I stuck up some information about the gender, the age, daily income, education, and so on, but I'm happy to go into that if anyone has questions. So after participants were consented into the survey and were shown to qualify, they learned from the Busara Center that they qualified to receive one of these 2 different aid types. So it was either cash or food. We ran some pilot surveys to make sure that the food we offered were actually objects that were often used, available for purchase in the city center. And then we also had people who lived in Kibera track the value of the aid objects leading up to our actually delivery dates, because there's often fluctuation in the value of these objects. And so we offered maize flour, cooking oil, and sugar. And then to hold constant the 2 manipulations as much as possible, we gave examples of how they could what they could purchase with this money. And we gave about 600 Kenyan shillings, which was roughly 2 days' salary for this sample. Now, after randomization, I ran some checks just to make sure that some of the important metrics were controlled across the 2 conditions. They looked good. And these are pictures from the 2 different pickup sites. We had 2 different locations so that there wasn't cross-contamination between our conditions. People weren't aware of the other manipulation, and they were also equidistant to the average participant's home. Now, looking at the main effect, we see, as hypothesized, that significantly more individuals came to pick up the food as compared to the cash. Around 88% of participants in the food condition came to pick up the in-kind food aid, whereas about 80% of participants came to pick up the cash. I ran a series of regressions controlling for factors like gender, food insecurity, education levels, number of children, and so on, and the effect remained significant. Also in the US studies, we replicate this effect across every single study, and we have a moderate effect size across each of these studies through a meta-analysis. And then I also have some data on the hypothesized mechanism supporting the dual pathway. I don't have time to get into it here, but I'm happy to send the paper to anyone who wants to see the methods for measuring these two different mechanisms. And we also find support for these mechanisms in the field study. So the takeaway of this research is that individuals have different expectations of the norms on them when offered different objects from charities, and this can influence take-up. Now, I don't want the takeaway from this to be that we should stop giving cash, that anyone should have the assumption that food is actually more effective. There are so many other benefits of giving cash over food. The purpose of this research is to highlight the importance of surveying the recipients, their perspectives and their minds, to understand if we might literally be leaving money on the table for even the most effective of interventions. And so for future work, I'm planning on figuring out ways to reduce that stigma so that we can make even cash more effective. Thank you.
Thank you. So in our, oh, sorry, Jane, Psychology, BC. One factor that I'm not sure if you looked at was believability or whether they believe you or not. So in our cash transfer study, one of the biggest hurdles we have to jump through with participants is that they don't believe this is true. The cash transfer is too good to be true. They thought initially their reactions were it's a scam. We're obviously not we're a real organization. It took us a while to make them believe us. So I wonder if that's the case in your data and participant survey. You know, with cash offering, initially they may express some suspicion or distrust in you or organization, and that might be independent from shame.
Yeah, so it's something that we were also wondering about in the data. So we had a few different strategies for hoping to address that. The first one was that we had different time points that we surveyed participants. The onboarding survey was really providing information about the Busara Center, which is a little bit, I think, more known in some of these communities since they do a lot of work in Kibera. So there's a little bit more trust in this organization a priori. But we also first consent them, have them say like, yes, I would be willing to work with Busara. So they're already saying they want to receive help from this organization before even knowing what they would be receiving. And then when we let them know what they're receiving, at that point, hopefully there's a bit more trust in that context. But just to also get the perspective of those who didn't choose to pick up the aid, we ran a follow-up survey over the phone with all of our participants who did and didn't pick up the aid. And we got, I think, like a 92% success rate on contacting everybody. And we asked those who didn't accept the aid, why didn't you accept it? And only, I think, 2 or 3 of the participants said, I thought it was a scam. So it didn't seem to be the major reason for why people weren't accepting the help. A lot of them had excuses, so you can't really know exactly why they're not accepting the aid in their context. But yeah, it didn't seem to be a dominant fear that was reported.
Thanks for that. So Mahesh Srinivasan at Psychology at Berkeley. So I was just wondering, you might think that like cash should be one reason it'll be preferred is because you're giving people credit for deciding how to allocate their resources, whereas with food, you're kind of making the decision for them. And so I was wondering why you sort of phrase the money as for food, and if you have any other experiments that didn't do that.
Yeah.
Still found the same.
Also, sorry, I forgot to repeat the question last time. This question is asking why we phrased it as money for food instead of having it be unconditional. So in the US surveys, we did have it framed as unconditional. We just said money versus food, and we found a similar effect. Now, there are many differences across those surveys and the field experiment. The reason in the field experiment we called it money for food is because naturalistically, people deal with so many hardships. And we can't control exactly for what they're thinking the money is for when giving cash. And so we were trying to hold as much constant as we could, the type of delivery, how it was delivered, what they think the aid is actually for. And so that's why in the field experiment, we had it as earmarked for food and even provided the objects as examples of what they could purchase that we had in our food condition. But in the studies in the US, we were actually able to tell participants, food insecurity is your dominant hardship. And if you're given help, this is what you need help with the most. And so we didn't actually need to worry about controlling for that when offering cash versus food. But I think in terms of like scaling this intervention for policy recommendations, one of the other reasons why cash is better than food is because it's flexible, fungible, and can meet different hardships, different needs. It is unconditional. And so if someone has other resources that they could access to meet their food insecurity and they need it for medical bills or something else, they have that flexibility. Whereas in-kind asset transfers are a bit more earmarked. Great question.
Hi, this is Catherine Thomas. I'm coming from the University of Michigan Psychology. This is really exciting work. I'm really glad that you're applying relational models theory to interactions between organizations and individuals. My question is about people's relationships with other people in their community, not just with the organization. So I found in similar work with this population that the shame and stigma seem to primarily, in like open-ended responses, really comes from how they are perceived by other people, so their meta perceptions of what people think about them, and whether they be subject to things like jealousy, for instance, or people seeing them as lesser than for having received aid. And I'm just wondering if you thought about that in terms of your measures of shame, and an implication of this is that that you could vary observability. So you asked to go into a very high trafficked area, and that might, making it anonymous or private might attenuate some of these effects, or shift their take up even more than just cash attention. Just wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, definitely. So the question was on observability in the cash condition, and if the stigma comes mostly from being observed as a cash recipient as compared to if it's an internalized stigma, I think is the kind of point you're trying to get at. So I did not differentiate internalized versus observed stigma in our question asking. So in the field context, we just had people give us the first 10 words that come to mind to describe how they felt when offered cash versus food. So it was very, very broad. And we did observe a difference in reported positive and negative social emotions in those responses, but it's uncertain if that was internalized or meta perceptions that were impacting that. The reason that we had it public is because, again, we wanted to control for the ease or difficulty as much as possible of going and accessing that aid. But I do think that you would lessen stigma by making it more private. And so that could be another intervention. Thank you.
We have to cut it there to keep things moving.
But I'm happy to
keep
talk
these
over lunch.
questions. Yeah, then talk over lunch.